Hi everyone, this is Ben, AI6YR, just another video of another radio. This is a recent restoration I did, which is a Kenwood TS-520, which it was built, I believe, between 1978 and 1982 or thereabouts. It's a hybrid rig, which means it has both semiconductors and tubes in it. The tubes are actually just the transmit side, and those are tubes for the finals and the driver. This radio, I always restore these things without taking pictures or documenting what they were looking like before, but none of the knobs were running on this, were moving on this when I got it. It was not receiving or sending, and the VFO would not move. So the local club actually gave it to me. I took a look at it, and I spent a few weeks trying to get back and running. So anyway, this is I'll go ahead and show a little bit about tuning this up and some other features, and maybe we'll make some contacts. Though it's in the middle of the Super Bowl, so I'm not watching the Super Bowl. So there's not too many people on, but I do have some recording that we did Winter Field Day a couple weekends ago, which I will put in here in between and maybe before this video.
Where's that? Norway, Honolulu 7, Norway, Japan, Field Day.
Go.
November 6th, Yankee Bravo, X-ray.
Norway, Honolulu 7, Norway.
QRZ for Kilo 5, radio Kilo.
Go.
Alpha 6 Charlie Victor.
We're using a slinky as our antenna.
Yeah, I remember from last year.
Yes. So we'll see.
Presentation of 5 minutes. I think Brad's got, he's the guy
AB6ET.
All the different slight variations, but some years ago we traveled to Australia, New Zealand, and
so I want to talk a little bit about tuning up an old radio. This one is, again, I mentioned, is both semiconductors and tubes, but most tube radios you have to actually adjust the plate and the load on the tubes to properly transmit. They also almost all have something called the drive control. Sometimes it's called exciter, which is, most of these radios have something called a pi network, which has a number of components, including a variable capacitor to match the radio to the antenna. So let me turn the volume up. The first thing you do on all of the old radios is you adjust the exciter or the drive, and this is up here on the corner here. So one easy way to do this is you actually tune for noise. I'll turn this up so you can hear it. Once you go to the right band that you want to be on, you tune for the most amount of noise on the band. And there's another way to do that too. The proper way on this radio is actually you go into what's called tune mode. There's actually a knob here, a mode, and there's a tune mode, which almost all old tube radios or radios with tubes in it have, which puts out a low power signal. It's actually a CW signal, but it's low enough that it won't damage anything when you're tuning up. On the 520, the first thing you do is you turn into ALC, assuming you've got the right, everything else adjusted, and you can look at the instructions. But in this case, you go to the band you're near in, right about there. We're on 20 meters right now. There's really not much going on, so the best way to do this is into a dummy load, but since the band's so quiet, I'm just going to tune up here. I already adjusted the drive, so but we'll double check that. So you have ALC on the meter, you're tuned, hit send, and then you adjust for the most amount of indication on ALC. It's right here, as you can see there. Now with any radio that you have tube, you don't want to be in tune too long, just in case of burning anything out if it's not adjusted. And the next thing we're going to do is now what's called dipping the plate. We're going to go to IP, And in here we're going to adjust this plate control until there's a dip. And it's tough to do when you haven't done it before, but if you watch the meter, this is going to go back and forth. You want to go down when there's a dip to the left, and where it's the most to the left is where you want it to be. And so it looks like it's right about there. Finally, the next thing you do is you go and you maximize the amount of power you're getting out of your radio. And the way you do that is turn this meter to RF. And then you're going to adjust both the plate, and this is called load, to maximize the RF output. And you can also look at a external power meter, which I often do. I have one over on the right, but I'm not, I don't have it in view of the camera. So we transmit again. You want to go back and forth and do this till it's the most amount of power going out, right there. So, you should be now tuned up. One thing you can do is you can also go into CW, continuous wave mode, and do the same thing, and the RF power will be greater, and you can fine tune at high power. Don't do that unless you've already done a preliminary tune though. And so there you go. So we can spin around, and maybe, I'm not sure if we can make contacts here. I've recorded a few before, which I will intersperse.
Cesaro Lane, the road that you would take to my house was Reach Road. Coordinated universal time.
Your attention, please. Effective January 31st, 2019, the National Weather Service Atlantic and Pacific high seas and storm warning.
This sounds like a really old radio. So let's talk a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of something like the Kenwood TS-520. Well, the biggest disadvantage of a radio like this is they are from the late 70s, early 80s, and that means you need to make sure they've been kept up or they've been restored. At that age, you know, obviously everything needs to be lubricated. All the pots need to be cleaned, and you also need to make sure that the capacitors aren't leaking. This radio actually had a lot of leaking capacitors in the audio section, and I replaced some of the others just because you don't want to do a wholesale replacement, but you do want to make sure that those are okay. Radios are like cars in that you need to run them often, and if you don't, they have a lot of issues. It turns out that the more you run a radio, the better at least these old ones seem to do. And that's because the capacitors need voltage through them to keep them in proper operating condition, and also all the knobs and everything moving. Keeping them lubricated is important. So anyway, the advantage of this is a very simple to use radio. Aside from tuning the radio, which you'll get a sense of, you can really see all the controls are on the front here. With new radios, there's a lot of menu settings. There's a lot of ways to get lost. In fact, with some of the new ones, if you press a button twice or 3 times and turn the wrong knob, you could be hopelessly lost, and you may have to reset everything to get it back. I fixed and restored a Kenwood TS-520, which is a brand new, top of the line Kenwood, which I have. I don't run very often, but the problem, apparently, it was sent back to the factory and then dropped in shipping. And I discovered the problem was they'd gotten so messed up in the menus that actually the whole radio was fine. It wasn't broken, but they just needed to reset everything. It was not receiving. The filters were all off, set to the side. It was just a misconfiguration issue. And then eventually it was dropped, and I had to fix some external knobs. But yeah, so something like this, Kenwood TS-520, which is aside from the tubes, is pretty much gives you everything you need for running on CW or sideband, upper sideband, lower sideband. Is actually a great radio. I have one, not this one, but a different one, which was my first radio. The only other downside is this does not have all the bands. This has 80 meters, 40 meters, 20 meters, 15 meters, and 10 meters. So it's missing all the work bands. And some of those bands are kind of fun to run. I particularly like 17 meters. But as a first radio, you don't have to run every band, and it is a good one to do. Now, the other advantage of this that I hear every time I transmit, almost every time, is how good it sounds for transmit. And I credit that to Kenwood being also a stereo manufacturer. The audio on these radios is phenomenal, both receive and send. And you hear a lot of compliments on the air, particularly when I'm running the TS-520 I have, and I'm sure likewise for this one. So anyway, that's the advantages and disadvantages of something like this this Kenwood TS-520. So if you do get a chance to get one, and either you're willing to fix it or it's been restored, they are a great radio, particularly for a new ham, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, the high image portion and watch it in 4K. So yeah, and their quality on that liftoff simulator program, the video quality is really good to start with, and the output is usually fairly good.
Alpha 8 Kilo Bravo, listening first of all to the west, any other seconds for our western estimate. Listening across western Canada, the northwest, the great northwest, flowering, and trying to be still fading. Maybe it's raining. First thing here, we're all flipping out because it went from -1 to 50. Well, nobody there. Now I'm going to listen down the Mississippi River and see if we have anybody here after the Super Bowl. Yeah, probably is going to have some effect tonight. Listening down the Mississippi, anybody in Louisiana, Eastern Texas, Arkansas, that way,